My name is Fred Poe, and I founded Poe Travel exactly 50 years ago. I decided that I needed to see the world, and I am not from a family with a great deal of money. I was the youngest independent travel agent in the country then, and now I'm about the oldest.
I've been traveling my entire life. I went to Brownie Day Camp one summer for one day and came home and told my mother as I took my clothes off and stood in front of the window unit, I'm never going to go to camp again. I hate to be hot. Subsequently, I never went to camp. We traveled every summer.
Ellison must have graduated from college about 25 years ago. And she worked in New York for an event planner, but she wanted to come home. She had gone to grammar school in Vienna, she had gone to high school in Massachusetts, she had gone to college in New York, and she came home and married somebody from her own zip code, which is a wonderful thing if you ask me.
We lived in Austria as a family, so we learned German. I went to boarding school, or public school in Vienna when I was 14. Travel is part of my makeup. It's not, I don't even consider it a luxury. It's just part of life. That's what I'm doing with my daughter Jane. And she does get to go to camp too, by the way.
My first trip to Europe, Fred planned back in the early 1960s. He had just opened this business, and he had wonderful notes, and we did this trip on $1,000 for over a month and drove a little car all through Europe, and it was an experience I'll never forget.
Poe Travel has always been inventive and a little bit courageous. We had the last, for example, tour to the old Persian Empire.
We were in Kabul, and at that point there were very few tourists. In fact, we had cocktails at the American Embassy, and then we were going to take a bus to go up to Mazar-e-Sharif, which is in the northernmost point of Afghanistan, and Kabul is kind of in central Afghanistan. When the bus came, it was a 1936 Mercedes Benz bus that had, well, it was very, very dilapidated, but it was the only bus available. So we started out, and not too far into the trip, we had our first bus breakdown, and I think a tire blew out. We were all sitting on boulders on the side of the road, and these natives just came out of the rocks, and they brought a little boy that had something terrible wrong with his head, I don't know, and Dr. Martin Isley was with us. And Martin got on the bus and got a little medical kit he had and treated the kid right there on the side of the road. And after that, people just came from nowhere. It was really a very moving experience.
It was a fabulous trip. It was a rough trip. We had a lot of people who weren't accustomed to rough travel, but they really, really swung with the punches. We have tried really hard not to be doctrinaire. We really were more in the area of trying to give people adventure or culture, which I know is a funny word. I think Goebbels said when he hears the word culture, he wanted to draw his pistol. But, and we've done some amazing things. We had the first American normal tour group into China. The Cultural Revolution was still going on. It was winding down. But we walked around. It was in cahoots with the Arkansas Art Center. And we walked around feeling like the Rolling Stones or something. People hadn't seen Americans. I mean, we were just phenomena on the streets.
We wrote them a letter and said, we are a small cultural group in the central part of the United States, and we would like to come to your country. We got a letter in response saying, submit a list of your proposed travelers with biographical information. and they selected 20 people to go on the trip. And we left and went to China and spent, I think, 3 weeks in China and traveled all over, and it was really quite an experience. We were the only, I mean, we were like people from Mars setting foot because they'd never seen any Westerners.
And we've done a lot of unusual things such as that. Having the Duke of Alba show us the Columbus drawn exploration maps at his palace in Madrid.
We went to the Duchess of Alba's home, the palace, to see the art collection. And when we arrived, we were met by a very attractive young man, and he took us through, and he was just very informed about everything. And I assumed that he was probably a curatorial director for the palace. And as we walked through one hall, he looked up and said, "Oh, that's my great aunt, the Duchess of Alba." And it was the famous painting. And then we went into another room, and there was a cabinet in the center of the room with a glass top, and it had a velvet throw over it. And he pulled it off and he said, "This is a map that Christopher Columbus did on his first trip to the New World." So we all looked at it, and then they put the cover back on.
Unbelievable.
And he turned out he was the Duchess of Alba's son.
Having the King of Thailand take our group on a private tour of his art collection, having a piano recital in Budapest on Bartók's piano in his apartment, and recently this trip to North Korea, which was not a trip with any important people particularly. We were just rank and file Americans who had this terrible curiosity to see the other part of the world.
We, through working as an art-related project, got our visas to go to Cuba. And we visited all kinds of people that were artists who couldn't get their work out of Cuba. It was really a fantastic experience. But one afternoon, the guide came up to me and said, "Jean, I don't know whether any of you are interested in going to the ballet tonight, because there's going to be the premiere of a ballet." So our guide came and got us at the hotel, and when we got down near the theater, there were crowds in the street, and there were army people with guns and things all around. And he said, "Well, there's probably some officials going to be there tonight. That's the reason they have all this security out here." But he said, "I'll let you out here, and when it's over, I'll find you. Just come out, and I will find you." So we went in and sat down, and just before the curtain went up, all hell broke loose, and we turned around, and in came Fidel Castro. And, I mean, he was all dressed in a navy blue suit. He looked like he just stepped out of GQ Quarterly, you know. And so it was quite an interesting experience. And then after the thing was over, all of the actors and dancers came out on the stage with flowers and threw them all out to us in the audience. And so that was my evening with Fidel Castro. Back in the 70s, we went to the Soviet Union when other people were not going. And we went to the ballet that night, and my daughter was seated with the Russian guide, and at intermission, a photographer came down to talk to the guide, and he was so intrigued that there was a young American child there that he gave her a picture that he had taken at rehearsal that day of the male star and the female ballerina. Well, it turned out to be Baryshnikov. We saw that night, and we did not know, nobody knew who Baryshnikov was. He had not defected, of course. And one of the men in our group from Benton, Arkansas, we came out that night, and he said, "Jean, I don't know who that guy was, but he sure could run and jump."
I've always felt like travel should be the search for the unfamiliar. We all know the familiar. And if we want the familiar, why spend $10,000 going to North Korea or someplace? I mean, go to Destin.